Hello, my name is Amalia Magner, and this is Mastery Assignment number 2 for Introduction to Communications at York College. I will be speaking about the culture, nonverbal communication, and mass communication of homeschoolers in Nebraska. I myself was homeschooled kindergarten through 12th grade, and although I am no longer a homeschool student, I am still a part of the broader Nebraska homeschool culture. There are 3 classifications to homeschool communicators as I see it. The first is the student, the one being taught, being homeschooled, and often they go to public school in high school, or they were in public school but were pulled out and then were homeschooled. There are lots of different ways to be a homeschooler. The second is former student, which there are not a lot of, but that is what I am now, as I am no longer being taught at home. I am no longer a homeschooler, but I was homeschooled, and so I'm a former student. And the third is the educator. Sometimes they are former students like myself, but often, like my parents who homeschooled my siblings and I, they were not homeschooled, but they chose to become a part of the culture by homeschooling their children or by becoming the educators of these homeschool students. I still interact with current students often, and occasionally I am in that educator role now as a tutor or a teacher. Homeschool is an interesting mix of individual culture and a collectivist culture. Homeschool students are taught to be independent learners, and so they are very individualist themselves, as they know how to be these independent learners and they know how to be on their own. However, they don't have that drive to compete with one another that is seen in individual cultures. So homeschool culture as a whole, at large, is very collectivist. There are homeschool groups throughout the state that meet to perform theater or to play basketball or to compete in speech and debate. And since they are these subcultures, the culture at large tends to be a collectivist culture that meets to help one another and to grow. My background in homeschool and my continuing attachment to and life in this homeschool culture in Nebraska impacts how I see life, culture, communication, and how I present myself in the world and how I communicate. This takes some adjustment as I am married to a public school teacher and to a former public schooler. And I've noticed a few things that are different about our communication. The first is that I'm comfortable speaking with authority figures more so than I am with my own peers. This comes from being in a multi-generational community and culture where I'm often interacting with my grandparents and my parents who are the educators, and also with younger siblings and students that I help educate. Where my husband is better at making friends in the peer group than I am. I also feel this need to present myself as mature and intelligent and not less than public schoolers, because for so long, homeschoolers were seen as less than and not as intelligent, not as smart, not learning as much. That's not as prevalent today, thank goodness, but that is how I grew up. That was a big part of the world's culture. So now that you know my background, let's move on to nonverbals and mass communication in the homeschool culture at large. There's an interesting phenomenon in homeschool culture that homeschoolers can often recognize each other without telling them that, telling the other person that they are a part of that culture. This often comes from being socially awkward because they are not used to being in these large peer groups day after day like public schoolers are. And so often they are unapologetically themselves, whether that's being very quiet or being very loud. They're not as easily peer pressured into being louder than they want to be or being quieter than they want to be. And that can lead to being a little socially awkward. And because of this, a lot of this a lot of their nonverbals come out of this. A lot of time homeschoolers will gesture very large, like I talk with my hands. A lot of times they will just act a little bit differently. And this is true in speaking with people of different cultures and different communication styles as well. They tend to be, homeschoolers tend to be curious, asking lots of questions, and they're not afraid to be seen, to use these large gestures, and to be known, even if they're acting awkward. Now, turning to mass communication, homeschoolers often don't have a lot of mass communication. Often they don't use social media, they don't have cell phones, and they don't watch television. This is becoming less true now. It was more true when I was growing up as a student, but often homeschoolers mass communicate by sending large email chains, by sending snail mail letters to each other and postcards. They don't typically use social media or mass media until they are at least in high school. One pro of this is that they often do not struggle with mental health as much as public schoolers because they are not feeling that comparison and inferiority feelings that can come from social media. But one con is that often they go through this sort of shock upon leaving home, upon going to college. They're not used to being around so many peers or around about using social media and using mass communication, and it can be a bit of a shock to the system when they leave home. In conclusion, I hope you understand the culture of the homeschool community in Nebraska a little bit better now, how homeschoolers are both individualists and collectivists, how they're often more comfortable speaking with authority figures than they are with peers, how their nonverbal communication makes them easily recognizable to other homeschoolers within their culture, and how mass communication, other than communicating with their own subcultures, their own friend groups, rarely enters their lives until at least high school. I hope this has been informative and that you can understand the homeschool community and the culture in Nebraska a little bit better now, and how it is a unique culture in itself, even with many different subcultures. I hope this has been helpful to you and that you understand the homeschool culture a little bit better now. Thank you.